Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Sarah explains why she ended up at a non-target school, how her 4.0 GPA opened a lot of doors, and how she ended up at a bulge bracket investment bank in New York. Learn how she dealt with private equity recruiting and when she realized that she was more interested in growth equity and the VC world. Finally, listen to how she finally got her big break, was able to make the jump, but only after 3 years of investment banking and an analyst to associate promotion. Enjoy. All right, Sarah, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. So I came out of a non-target public school, more of an engineering school. I was a finance major there. Came from a little bit of an untraditional background. So no parents in finance or anything, even corporate or business related. Actually ended up my sophomore year getting pretty lucky and having an internship in kind of financial research. And that's where investment banking first kind of came across my radar. From that, I decided I was going to give it a shot. Didn't actually think I would have any success on that recruiting front. My school was not at all a feeder, even though it was a top public school. There was just zero investment banking recruiting on campus.
Just because it was like more engineering based and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it had all of the top, companies looking for computer science and engineering majors. On the business side, there was pretty much no formal support.
Got it. Fair.
So ended up honestly just applying online. It was a huge fan of Wall Street Oasis. That's kind of where I learned everything to go through the process. Yeah, I mean, it was beyond a huge help. So I was constantly on the forums, just looking for all of the steps to take. Ended up trying to network, reach out cold to people, and really did not get much traction from that. We didn't have alums on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And it was difficult to kind of get that connection with people. So ended up applying online, and I went to kind of a big name bank, but a regional office. And I think that put me in a much smaller pool. So did my summer there and then re-recruited for full time and went to a bulge bracket.
I'm silencing my phones. So you're
no worries.
So you basically have kind of a non-traditional background, but tell me a little bit more about, let's go all the way back to undergrad and just start there. And, you said you got lucky with this sophomore summer internship, like finance research. Tell me a little bit about, like, how did you get lucky on that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that internship was just kind of my first formal exposure to the world of business in general.
But did you get it through like networking? How did you get it?
No, I actually got that one through an on-campus program. So it was through someone that wasn't even an alumni, but they wanted to help.
Why even major in finance? So did that internship kind of push you towards finance or to major in it?
No. Yeah. So interestingly enough, my dad, who is not a business person at all, has always been obsessed with reading Barron's. And when I was a kid, he would take us to the bookstore and we would go off and read books and play with toys, and he would be reading Barron's. And so from a young age, or like watching Bloomberg. And so from a young age, he likes to trade, or he likes to. Yeah, his motto is buy low, sell high, which he thinks is novel. So from that, I was always interested in it. I loved my econ courses in high school, and it just felt the most natural. But I did kind of dabble in doing computer science or engineering for a bit.
So you knew kind of going into school that finance might be a thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Why not go to like a finance school or like a public school more known for finance? You're still kind of dabbling. You're still thinking, engineering might be a good path.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I won't give too much away, but like it won't be hard to figure out which school I went to. But essentially, like in the place I was an in-state resident, they give full tuition scholarships. And the school I went to was like easily the number one there. So it wasn't much of my own choice, unfortunately.
Yeah, so it's financial. That makes sense. Okay. So you're basically, so you kind of knew you had this interest in finance. You kind of do this, you said you dabbled in like computer science. Did you dabble like freshman year and you're like, hell no?
Yeah. Yeah. I took the intro class, or I took a couple of classes and just realized, like, you look beside you and you realize that for these other people, coding is like a second language. Like, it's so natural. And I realized those are the people I'm going to be competing with in interviews. Like, it's not natural to me. I'm forcing it. Like,
but you still
I'm
did
at
well.
office hours. Yeah, I did well, but doing well, I think there's a big difference between like really crushing yourself to do well in something and then doing well in something that's more natural. Yeah.
You had to really, really work for it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So then you thought, maybe this finance thing sounds more interesting. I can, buy low, sell high, like my dad. So
yes.
So that's basically what you probably thought of finance as, like, more the markets at that point. Did you know a lot about like investment banking or anything?
No.
Yeah. So tell me how you did this financial research internship sophomore year. It was through a program for your school. Oh, great. So not too lucky. It sounds like they kind of teed it up for you a little bit, or was it hard?
Yeah. No. So once I got there, it was more luck once I got there. It was interesting. Most of what I was doing was just kind of research to come up with like original posts for the company. But they would send me, it was in like a major financial center, and they would let me go to these networking events that I had absolutely no business being at. And when you're a 20-year-old, kind of side by side with people that are like well established in their financial careers, you really don't have anything in common or anything to contribute to them. So for me, I think the only thing we had to talk about was, oh, what are you going to do after you graduate? And me being someone that was interested in business, but didn't really know what I wanted to do, they were all like, oh, well, you should do investment banking. And that was the first time I had even heard of this. And then I went online and I looked up salaries and I was like, oh, I should do investment banking.
You didn't look up hours at the same time?
No, I mean, I think before you get there, I think every young person falls into the same trap. They just see the number and they're like, oh no, I would do anything for that. It's fine.
Yeah. I can work the 100 hours and then you actually work it. And then you're like, wow, that was really bad.
Exactly. It's exactly how it went.
Okay. So kind of exposed to the word, even investment banking, sophomore, summer internship, you kind of going, so then you start kind of going to, you go into junior year. What's the thought process like? Okay, finance all the way. Here we go. Are you thinking like recruit junior year? And how did that go for summer internships?
Yeah, so that's what I was doing. I mean, it started off.
Did you know the cycle? Did you know the cycle was like so early or anything like that?
No, I mean, I feel really fortunate now when I talk to people. I mean, how much the cycle has changed. It was still even pretty earlier. Normal. Yeah, I think I was doing this back in 2013, 2014. And it was, I didn't get my internship until February or March, which is unheard of now. And this was at a top bank.
I have a mentee. She's at Fordham. And for the podcast called Monkey to Millions, I mentor basically 3 or 4 people at a time from like non-targets or whatever, just non-traditional candidates. And she has already landed obviously she's just starting her, she's in her first semester. She has her sophomore lined up, but then like the junior summers are going to be in the spring of sophomore year. So not even the summer.
I think back to that. And this is why I feel so lucky. I mean, just one of the reasons, like if I was recruiting now, I would have missed that boat because they would have already recruited for junior year before I'd even heard what investment banking even was. So I feel for people going through it now. I think it's tough.
Yeah. Well, I guess everyone's in the same boat, but it really hurts the kids who just get exposed to it junior year, sophomore year.
Yes,
kind of late.
Definitely.
Anyways, so back to your story. So you're not really too aware of what's going on, but are there any sort of like, are you doing networking at this point? Like at least you had some exposure to like having to network at this job, which that's probably the best skill set you developed like over the summer is just talking to people at those conferences.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely getting comfortable with that. But I was inherently, I think,
social,
super shy.
Oh,
and I was shy. I would call myself like an extroverted introvert at this point, but I think that came with time and getting confident. through working. So at that point, I felt extremely uncomfortable reaching out to people that like I didn't have some baseline commonality with. And like I was a complete non-target, non-traditional background. So I think there just wasn't much to kind of leap pad off of. So for me, I did a little bit of that, would get pretty discouraged not getting responses. And then
on like LinkedIn?
On LinkedIn. Yeah, exclusively on LinkedIn.
Yeah, just for the listeners out there, the response rate's probably around 1 to 3% if you're good.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, there's angles to that I've since learned, and I love to give people advice on, because I get contacted all the time through LinkedIn, and I'll respond. If it's a personalized message and I think I can do something, I'll always respond. If it's not, I won't.
Can you give an example? Is it like have to be alum, or can you give an example of somebody who's not an alum?
No, yeah. Funnily enough, almost every single person who has reached out to me is not an alum. Like I've had people from Ivy Leagues that, went straight into buy side roles reach out to me, but because they put something about, I'm currently in XYZ industry and I'm thinking about getting into venture capital. I saw your path and I'd love to talk to you about that. Like if it's anything that just shows like you didn't send this. Yeah, they read my profile, and I can see like there being some relevance there. Like I know that you can make that jump with the right advice. Like sometimes I'll get people reach out to me and it's just like, I know there's nothing I can say to you that's going to get you a VC job. And that's, not my preference, but it is what it is. Yeah. And I just don't want to waste anyone's time. So that's a part of it, I think.
All right, cool. So yeah, I mean, I think that is tough when you can't do something to help somebody, even though they want to. Do you ever say like, just learn more, or you got to start from ground zero, or you just usually you don't have time to respond to them?
No, I mean, I have responded, and I'll give like, as long as it was personalized, I'll almost always respond. And, a lot of times I just tell people like, maybe you need to like find a top tier startup role, or you need to try to lateral to, a top consulting firm or bank. Like, I think sometimes people need to hear like the hard truth of like just how competitive this is. Yeah. Because unfortunately it's, I would call it maybe like, I didn't get to this earlier, but like I'm in VC now, and it's probably the most elitist field within finance, which I never thought you could get more so than investment banking and private equity. So that's been shocking for me. But yeah, I think sometimes you just have to like really just give people the honest truth that, they might not get through different channels.
Yeah, through our mentor. We always tell our mentors, like, just be honest with them. Like, don't sugarcoat, because it's like, doesn't do them any good. Okay. So
exactly.
You're kind of coming into your now junior year.
Yes.
And you are like, this finance thing this is it. I'm going to go investment banking. So so you're sending some LinkedIn messages, getting discouraged. So how do you even get any interviews?
Yeah. So I don't even know how this happened.
Did you just get one? Did you just get one and that was it?
No. So funnily enough, when I was interviewing, I just applied to every single bank online, got very few interviews.
Like 3 first rounds? 5?
Yeah, I think first round's probably like 4 maybe.
And higher review wasn't out yet. It was just real phone interviews.
Yeah, it was real phone interviews.
Yeah.
So one, I think my first one was really early on. I think it was with a regional bank. And at that point, I really hadn't done what I needed to do in terms of prep. And I remember being asked, why do you want to do investment banking? And talking about how much I loved investing. So that was a huge wake up call for me when I really got the door slammed shut in my face. And then I kind of took a couple months and just read through the Rosenbaum and Pearl book. And luckily, most of the big banks did interviews later on. Yeah. And so I kind of knew.
Burn too many bridges or blow up too many times.
No, thankfully, thankfully I didn't. I chalk it up to inexperience. I'm not too embarrassed anymore, but at that point it was a real wake up call. But I think, one thing I would say to people coming from a non-target or a non-traditional background, like, I think you have to do anything you can to stand out. And for me, that was just getting as high a GPA in undergrad as I could. Like, I knew I am from a non-target school. there is nothing like exceptional about my background. Like I want my GPA to like get picked up when they're doing that online, like mass pool screen.
Yeah.
I want that to be picked up. I'm sure this is politically incorrect, but I'm sure, gender might have something to do with getting in a smaller pool and being picked up, by the online scrapers. But I think my GPA was really what got me in the door in those interview rooms. And otherwise, I think I would have had no chance.
Do you mind sharing your GPA?
Yeah. So I had a 4.0, but that was very much a like, I was in Starbucks every weekend.
Yeah, you realize
like,
all
in
the
library.
You realize all the non-targets listening right now who have like a 3.2 are like,
Yeah.
It's like,
I'm sure.
I have no hope. It's not true. I've interviewed
not at all.
many of people from non-targets with low GPAs, even under sub 3.
Yeah, I think then successful. It's just, then I think, you really have to put in the legwork of networking. And I think the GPA enabled me to not necessarily have to do that, which I think for my personality and my confidence at that point was necessary.
More doors. It opened more doors. It got you on par with a lot more of the, not necessarily an Ivy League, but it almost moved you to a semi-target status where you actually got some
Exactly.
So you amazing GPA. So you're kind of going through, you're getting at least a few first round interviews. Luckily, the first one you bombed was a local bank. So you're not too disappointed. So tell me a little bit about how, so you prepped, but then tell me about that second or third interview. Like, did you feel like you were ready, or were like the technical questions pretty down the middle, like easy, or did it still take a few more reps? I know for me, I worked at Rothschild. Rothschild was like one of my last interviews. And there's a reason I got the offer on like my last interviews, because I was so much better compared to my first.
I had literally the exact same experience and ended up going to a very similar bank. So that was my last one. I think I didn't do the interview until February. And that was after I had already gone through so many and kind of knew you're going to get asked the DCF question. You're going to get asked the depreciation. And then I had gotten to practice it. But I think the key with the bank I ultimately got the offer from, and that was my one and only offer. So I got super lucky. Yeah. But the interviewer, he was an associate, and everything that I didn't get spot on right, like his style was to kind of like really try to work through my reasoning on my answers to those questions versus just being like, I'm dinging you because you're wrong.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was really unique to the group that I ended up in. Mm-hmm. So I certainly was not perfect on the technicals, even when I interviewed and got the role. But I think it was a combination of that and just like really reading up on the industry that the group I was interviewing for covered and like being knowledgeable. So it was kind of like a perfect storm of all of these different factors that contributed to the offer versus like being 100% on technicals.
That was for a summer analyst basically offer for.
Yes.
And so was that in New York, in the big city?
It was not. So it was a regional office.
Regional. Okay. So you go to a regional office. Were you thinking at this point, like, oh, I'd rather be up in New York, or like, what was your thought process of going to regional? You're just happy you got an offer.
Yeah, honestly, I was so happy I got an offer. Yeah. I had kind of the city I went to school in, like I had grown up there my whole life. I wanted to go to a big major city. And this was a major city, not necessarily for finance, but it was an awesome city. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was all about like name of the bank, what's the experience? And then I just don't want to be in my home city. And I really wasn't thinking about, I want to be in New York. I ended up going to New York the following year for full time, but that was more just a result of like where I thought I could get a better experience bank wise.
For sure. So let's talk about a little bit about the summer internship and just how you survived and what was it like? Was it more like a whining and dining selling you, or was it like you're working 80, 100-hour weeks and like good luck surviving? What would you say?
Yeah, it was not. So it was a tiny office. Unfortunately, the associate that had interviewed me and I was really excited to work with, he ended up leaving right before I joined. So I kind of was like under the supervision of just an analyst who was kind of also on his way out. So it was a pretty brutal summer. No real mentorship, no real training at all. I had no idea what I was doing. Like I always think back to I didn't even know like Control X. Like I literally just knew nothing. So it was really brutal. The hours were rough. They wouldn't let me touch models. So it was just a ton of processing and I didn't really feel like I was learning.
So
But the people were great.
Were you working long hours then? Because you're so
yeah.
slow at stuff.
I was super slow, but they also just
gave you
kind of, they gave me a lot.
Do you think a lot of that was like work that needed to be done, like for pitches and stuff, or was it just to like test you?
I think it was a combination of both. I think it was work that needed to be done. Like there were many times where the analyst would leave like early. And I remember staying in the office and one of the VPs calls and he's like, what are you like? I can't believe you're here and your analyst is not. Like this is ridiculous. So it was a weird summer, but it was a good, I think, exposure to kind of like the politics and the hour expectations that come with banking.
And tell me a little bit about, did you get a return offer? What was the thought process? And then tell me about like, was it exploding? Did you have time to shop it like going into your senior year or what? That whole process I think is a little tricky nowadays because it happens so early.
Yeah. So I did get a return offer. I think it was a bigger signing bonus that exploded. But then you could let that expire and then so I think I probably had like maybe until September. So it was enough time to shop it. I had kind of started to set up networking calls.
Did you not want to go
my
work?
Summer?
Did you not want to go to like such a small, once you had tasted that, you were thinking a bigger place might be better?
Yeah. So I think it was a combination of a couple things. I was very much considering going back because they were really, like picking up the phone saying you should come, like, you end it and you forget about all of the bad things that happened over the summer.
Is this in the regional office they wanted you?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But I think for me, I just felt kind of like I was flailing and left on my own that summer. And I, now in retrospect realize like, I went to a bulge bracket for full time. And even if I wasn't getting training from people that were above me, I was never alone in the office, like there was always someone. If I, my first time having a model ref out because of circularity, like there's an analyst right behind me that has done this a billion times for 2 years that I can go to. And at this bank, there just wasn't, like, it was me alone all the time. And I just knew that was going to be a cap on what I could learn. So that was the main motivator, and the industry focus wasn't necessarily what I wanted to spend my career in. It was very specialized.
Got it.
And I knew, like, for someone that wanted to do tech eventually, there was literally no overlap. So that was also another factor.
Why tech eventually? Why were you thinking tech eventually?
Just personal interest. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the few things, like,
did you think
few
VC?
Industries.
Did you think VC eventually? Like, was that where you were thinking?
No, I had no idea what VC even was.
You were like maybe startup. You were maybe like go to a startup, something like that.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I mean, I think before my internship, I thought, if I get into investment banking, why would anyone ever leave? Like, you hear MD salaries and then you do it and you're like, oh my God, I get why everyone would leave. But no, I wasn't even thinking that far ahead. I was just like, I think I like tech, and it's a lot easier to work 100 hours when you don't hate it.
I don't think most 20, 21-year-olds are thinking that far ahead anyway. So that's fine. That's normal. So no offense to the listeners, to all my monkeys that are under 20. So in terms of just now you have that offer in your pocket, you kind of let the super high signing bonus, what was it, like 20,000 if you sign now, or 10,000 if you sign later, kind of thing?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Something like that. So you let it expire. So you kind of like, okay, now I can kind of look at my options. I can shop the offer a little bit. Tell me how you went about that process, because you still don't have on-campus recruiting to fall back on.
Yep. None at all. Yeah.
So is it, you had just started saying, sorry, you were setting up some networking calls. So was this like in like the late summer, like August, where you started kind of reaching out? Was it people in the regional city? Was it people in New York? Like, how did you approach it? Like the filter?
Yeah. So I think it was July. And I really just looked for advice on Wall Street Oasis of people that had done the same thing. It was particularly tough for me because I wasn't in New York. I think that full-time lateral recruiting happens only at like some of the biggest banks and the biggest groups, because that's the kind of the sources that get the recruiter emails. Mm-hmm. So I missed out on that. I think I started a little late. I just went to LinkedIn and reached out to people that had also made a transition between their junior summer and full time, and just kind of reached out asking for advice. It, to be honest, like, had limited success with it. Like, people actually got on the phone, so that was great, but just kind of heard the constant of like, oh yeah, I'll put you in touch with HR. And sometimes they did, but then nothing would come out of it because
How many of those
I think the
calls
spots were filled.
How many calls?
I probably did around 10.
Yeah, and you felt like you were a little late, even in July or August when you were doing these?
Yeah, I think it felt a little late, and it just kind of felt like, I think these spots are reserved for people lateraling from other bulge bracket banks. You know, like, it felt like people going from, I don't know, like Barclays to Evercore versus my regional office, even though it was a great bank, to Evercore kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. You just got that sense because it wasn't like they weren't jumping up and down to like get you an interview or anything like that, or?
Yeah. I mean, you're just kind of given the runaround. A lot of times, like, if I would talk to someone, it's funny, I actually talked to a guy that was in my same regional office who ended up making the same move for full. He got the return, and then for full time, he moved to a bulge bracket bank in New York. And even he was saying, he's like, I don't know how recruiting works at my firm. Like, it's a black box. And now, you know, having worked at a bulge bracket myself, I can totally say the same thing. It is like, it's like, if you're not at one of these target schools, like, it's all kind of this weird black box that, like, I had no idea how to get someone an interview. And I was an associate at one point. Like, it's just a weird process with all of that bureaucracy.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you did end up making that transition. Was the offer like key to, like, you needed that offer in hand to kind of get that other offer, do you feel like, or was it already?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it would be really, really tough without it. Like, I mean, I had a friend that worked at Goldman investment banking over the summer, didn't get a return offer, and then ended up going to a really small middle market bank, like a name you would know, but like, definitely not what you would want to be doing after spending a summer at Goldman. So it's tough. It's just so tough. I think people see it as a red flag, even though it's absolutely not necessarily. But for me, I ended up getting it through an online application again, which is insane. But I think it goes to what a smaller pool you're in once you have investment banking already on your resume, as well as just probably the GPA thing again. And ended up having my first round interview
till September.
So it was funny. I had my first round interview actually on my last day of my internship, and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to figure out when I can like duck away from this and not be suspicious, because I hadn't gotten the offer yet. Like, they didn't tell me until literally that afternoon.
Right.
So it was nerve-wracking.
So you were on your last day of your internship. You have a first round interview at another bank, and you're like waiting to see if you even get a return offer from the first place. So how did you do? You just ducked out for the morning or something like that? Came back and they told you in the afternoon you got the offer?
Yeah, I think so.
And then, so how did it proceed from there? I guess you were already in the process with the other bulge bracket, so it was okay. You had plenty of time.
Yeah, so they did it. I would say full time was way more streamlined than summer. So it was literally that first round, and then it was like a super day email, and people flew out. So it was very quick.
Tell me about the super day. Was it stressful? Did you feel like ready this time?
Yeah, I mean, I felt a lot more ready. I think you're always nervous about what you don't know. So I was very nervous that it was going to come up like, oh, what kind of modeling did you do? And like, they wouldn't let me touch a model. So I didn't have good experience there. Yeah. But it was actually great. Like, the thing I would say about a bulge bracket is you're getting interviewed by people from all types of groups. So you might have one that's a technical interview with someone in M&A, but like, the rest are mainly behavioral and really trying to understand your motivation for switching. And I think my story just made a ton of sense. And surprisingly, a lot of people at the super day next to me like did not do investment banking that summer. So I kind of had a good feeling that it was pretty likely I'd get the offer.
And so you did. So were you excited, or were you like, you're like, I can party my senior year, not worry? What was the thought process? Like, that's it, I did it kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly that probably
How did
August
you
or
finish with a
September.
4.0 after knowing you had an offer your senior year?
Well,
Wow.
I saved my easiest, funnest classes for
Got
senior
it.
year, which I recommend everyone do.
I got it. Okay.
But no, it was awesome. When I was interviewing actually in August at different banks, I remember I interviewed at one that was like super technical interviews, and I remember thinking before, like, God, you already have an offer. Why are you doing that? Like, I really didn't want to do it anymore. So it
Mm-hmm.
was such a relief when I got it and could just relax. Senior year was definitely the funnest time of my life to date.
Yeah. Okay, fair. So you're kind of have that offer. You had the obviously the internship offer, but then you get the bulge bracket offer in New York. You take it. You have a long run at that firm. So I'm looking at
Yeah.
here. You were an analyst for almost over 2.5 years, and then an associate for half a year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's much longer than I thought.
That's over three
Yes.
years.
Yeah. It's like 30 in investment banking
So
time.
so tell me a little bit about just the progression as an analyst. Did you feel like you probably still had, you went through training, but you still had a lot of the, get up to speed on the modeling and stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely felt compared to my peers, like I felt behind at
Mhm.
training. Like I felt like I just didn't have the technical skill set that some people clearly just naturally did. And training just ran through so fast the
Yeah.
things that I felt were important, like particularly accounting. And when you get to the actual like DCF, LBO, like those
Yeah.
things, they would take like a day. And then for, weird culture things, they would take a week. So I definitely was horrified going in. But
Yeah.
it ended up working out well, just being in such a large class with so many analysts next to me. Like we leaned on each other all the time, and there was so much support at the junior
Awesome.
level. So that's really why I stayed, I think, so long.
Yeah. So you did a couple years. Was there ever, when did like VC come on the radar? Was there any thought? I know so many people are like private equity. That's like the natural
Yeah,
jump. Tell me about, it sounds like you didn't get caught up in that, like especially first or second year,
I
and
did.
or you did. Okay.
Yeah, I
And so
did. Like, I mean, it's impossible not to at a bulge bracket.
yeah,
Like, because everyone is, so you feel like that's the promised land and that's what you have to do. And if
right.
you're not doing it, you're like, oh, are people judging me? Like, you just fall into that trap so easily.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up doing I always knew like I never wanted to go to like a mega fund. Like I knew I wouldn't be successful there.
Mm-hmm.
But I was interviewing more for like middle market PE. And I remember getting past like a couple rounds, getting a case study for one. And I remember it was a sim, and it was about like medical devices. And I was just so bored out of my mind, even trying to read it. And I was like, okay, you can't even pretend you like this for a weekend to do this case study. Why are you trying to do this for 2 or 3 years as a career? And after that, I was like, okay, I need to just stop, get more exposure to different kinds of deals to really think about like, what do I want to do next? Or,
Mm-hmm.
more honestly, like not necessarily what do I love, but what do I not hate? Like that
Right.
case study.
That's
And
honest.
then kind of took the next 6 months or a year, maybe even, and just got on more types of transactions just to get more exposure.
And then, so when did kind of VC come on the radar?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. I think it when I was lucky enough to do a leverage financing transaction in a software space. And that was when I kind of realized like, wow, I really like this. I like the mix of quantitative, there still being a model, with the qualitative, like going over competitive landscape, industry research. Like I thought it was a really nice blend. And I think from that, it kind of became clear to me that I should just be looking at like growth equity VC and just see
Yep.
what hits. Because I think that's what I'm going to enjoy and actually have a chance at like sticking through versus just doing a 2-year stint again and then trying to go to business school and then trying to figure out what I want to do.
Yeah.
So ended up deciding after that transaction, I think, that I was going to specifically recruit for VC and growth.
And so how did you approach that rent? You reached out to recruiters. I mean, at this point you had been promoted to associate, correct? From the straight analyst to associate, or you were about to
So
be?
at this point, I was still an analyst. I
Yeah.
was probably like
Second year.
16 months in. Yeah. Sometimes second year.
Okay. And so you do get the associate promote. are they trying to like, and they have a huge, banks in general have a huge attrition problem across the board at that exact level, from like the second year analysts piecing out early to the associates leaving. Was there like a hardcore press to keep you when they found out, or was it too late? Were you like out the door, like I got an offer by like?
Yeah, I remember going into my MD's office and he knew what it was, like, cause I would never go into his office.
Yeah.
He wasn't like an open door kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he was just like, no, like, he's like, no, we can't talk. I think there was a little bit, but like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's all about like MDs and who you're close with. Like MDs that I was close with and who were mentors were super excited about it and really encouraged me to do it. I think anyone encouraging you not to is like worried about their own numbers, because they get judged on attrition, but it wasn't a big deal. Like, but I was dead set on leaving. It wasn't, one of those things where I was going to stay in banking for longer.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about just how you prepped for like venture capital or growth equity interviews. Was it different from like the private equity stuff, or were you still looking at like, I need to look at, these investments as like a principal investor? I need to look at it did you like look at IRR tables and study, LBO models at all? Did you?
Yeah.
Or was it more like, let me learn the VC landscape more and read more like TechCrunch? Like, what were you doing?
Yeah. So I would say it's really a spectrum, which is what makes it so difficult. So if you're looking at like a pure growth equity role, I would say it's pretty similar to private equity. So there would almost always be an LBO modeling test that wouldn't be take home. Like it would be sit in a recruiter's office. Yep. So you kind of have to already have that same like private equity skill set to do well in those interviews. And that was the most important thing, honestly. It was like having your technicals down and then your story for why this, especially over private equity, because they're really on the lookout for people that like want to be doing private equity versus people that just kind of like, oh, this is close enough and they could get the interview. Like they want people that specifically want to do growth. And then VC is so mystifying. Like I really struggled interviewing because those interviews could cover anything.
Yeah. How did you even start getting the interviews, and how did you even get out of the office?
Yeah. So it was, that part was brutal. Like my group was not recruiting friendly. Yeah. It totally varied by group, but like my group head just was not okay with people leaving. So that was tough. I kind of became known as someone that was always recruiting because I was just always on so many calls. And luckily I was like a good performer. So it's not like they were going to fire me, but it can be a real issue if you're letting your work slip.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, your question was, how did I kind of like get started?
Yeah. Like how did you even, so it sounds like it was kind of out in the open that you were recruiting. So it was a little bit easier. So that kind of answers part of my question. The other question is just so you were able to step out. You don't have to be like, I had a doctor's appointment, another doctor's appointment, I have a dentist appointment, someone's sick, you did a little bit of that probably, but there was also
a little bit of that. Yeah. I was like the kind, obviously you can't do this anymore in times of COVID, but like I was the type where it's like, I would come into the office if I was dead sick because I needed to save that sick day for when I had to fly out, because almost all my interviews were on the West Coast. So if I had a super day, like I had to have not been sick before that. So that was the tricky part in that.
Like, you have like the flu, you're like throwing up in the bathroom. You're like, I'm here.
It was bad. You can't do that anymore, but it was awful.
Yeah.
Because it's still like they knew I was recruiting, but it wasn't okay. So it's still this weird middle ground. And like, I think at that point, like any bulge bracket is hyper political. So you're always going to have people looking for something to like kind of rag on you for. And I knew that this was an easy one for me. So I always tried to balance that. But in terms of the actual prep or like even getting the opportunities, I tried to go through recruiters. To be honest, I found them pretty worthless for venture capital. I've heard GlowCap is great. They would never let me look at anything that wasn't in my specific industry, which was really frustrating because I wanted to do generalist software VC. I think it might be different if you're at like Goldman TMT. Maybe you have a ton of recruiters reaching out to you and they're showing you everything. Yeah. But for me, unfortunately, it wasn't the case. So I ended up using a website that I found on Google that's kind of like the holy grail for VC job opportunities. And just yet again, it's called John Gannon blog, I think .com. Yeah, it's awesome. It's truly incredible. It's how I ended up getting my job. Yet again, just through applying online, which is crazy. And honestly, I would say my VC recruiting experience was just trial and error. Like, did so poorly on all of the initial interviews, but that's how I learned. I mean, I just didn't really know what they were looking for. And I think...
But did you know what they were talking? Did you know enough about the industry? The reason I asked this is a little selfish because we're releasing, or we're just, by the time this airs, it will have been released, a venture capital course. So I'm curious if we'll have a section on recruiting, but I'm curious if like just having the general industry knowledge and how things work, how different rounds work and stuff, would that have been helpful for you? Or like, that doesn't even matter. It's just more like fit and tell me about the space. Tell me about the specific, tell me like what it was like, like what really mattered to wow them.
I would say it's a little bit more of the latter. I think you would differentiate yourself if you could talk intelligently about the former. Mm-hmm. But I would say the most important thing, and this is the trap that I certainly fell into and I see other people falling into with tech VC all the time, is people want to get into it because they think it's cool and they think it's interesting.
Totally.
And you're thinking about investments from the perspective of, oh, well, I like using this. I think it's cool. Yeah, the user versus, am I going to make any money on this? Like, how's the go-to-market? How do you sell this? Who are the potential acquirers? Mm-hmm. So it's much more like the best advice I ever got was from someone that used to work in my group that then went to a really large growth equity firm. And it sounds so simple, but he was like, you have to think like an investor. Like, everything you say needs to come from an investor perspective versus a consumer perspective. And that for me was a real wake up call of like, wow, I've totally been falling into that trap. And that's why I'm not getting traction.
Yeah. If you're like TikTok, it's so fun, like you're done.
Yeah, you're done. You're done. And everyone's using that and everyone's going to TechCrunch and like they're saying those investments and like you're competing with people that have worked in Silicon Valley for years and have parents that are VCs. Like, you just have to really take a view on something. And that's the other component, is like having your own internal thesis on a space and a market and being really well informed.
Like how you prepped for that? Like, well, so you kind of got that advice and it kind of like opened your eyes that this is why I'm not getting traction. So you kind of, this is really interesting. So like, then what did you do? So like, instead of just reading the headlines on TechCrunch, you maybe started digging a little bit, like specifically into software, into certain niche within the software. And you're like, I'm going to learn this niche really well. And then I'm going to pitch something, or how did you approach it?
Yeah. I would say that's a pretty accurate representation of it. So you kind of learn, I mean, after each interview, I had this master Word doc that I kept on my work computer. That was just all of the questions I was getting asked. And there were pretty similar themes. So it was always, like, tell me about the technology or space that you're particularly excited about right now. Mm-hmm. And then from that, I would kind of pick something that was very much on the software, not consumer side. So it didn't look like, I was one of these. I think people just fall into this trap all the time of like, just looking at the Facebooks and the TikToks, which is just
you don't want to be a fanboy type of fangirl.
Yeah, exactly. Which is tough because we all are, honestly. But so I would try to find things. I think like I subscribe to this newsletter. It's called Axios Pro Rata. That's like very big in VC. And you'll get from that, you'll see like all these Series A, Seed, Series B rounds. And these are companies that aren't necessarily making it to TechCrunch. Mm-hmm. And from there, you'll kind of find one just from the little description that sounds really interesting and cool. And then you kind of decide like, oh, okay, this is something that I'm actually interested in. There's a lot of kind of available content online. So other investment firms will have already written a thesis on Medium. But it's not necessarily something that the everyday consumer knows about.
Yeah, and
that's a really great way.
There's
not that much out there. So it's a great way to like differentiate yourself. And I don't even think like I got too caught up when I was interviewing and like thinking that I had to know everything. Like I was interviewing mainly for generalist roles. So it's like, oh, I should know everything about the fintech ecosystem and industrials and horizontal software. But really like picking one thing and becoming an expert in it, I think is how you really differentiate yourself, because you just seem so well informed and well spoken versus just knowing a little bit about a lot of things.
Yeah. So a lot of it's like kind of doing that research, getting subscribed to like those newsletters like that maybe kind of have a little bit more like under the radar. There's another newsletter called like Trends or Hustle from The Hustle or something like that. It's similar, I think.
Yeah, there's quite a few now.
Yeah, there's probably
which makes
a lot.
A huge difference.
Yeah, and so like you can probably get some of these smaller Series A, like you said. Even there's probably even something out there talking about like companies that are getting like angel rounds.
Totally.
Like that.
Yeah, and honestly, like at that point, there's nothing better than Google. Like it really was for me so much more useful than anything else. But I really wished that there had been a resource, like, because I had downloaded the PE guide when you guys did that. And that was super helpful, even though I didn't pursue it. Like, and VC, there's nothing like that. So you really are dependent on hearing from people that have already done it.
Yeah, but I still think, it's not getting a VC course, like even from us or from anyone, it's still not complete in terms of your preparation. Like you have to do you have to do the research. You have to decide on that niche and kind of dive in.
Yes. And I think that's probably a big part of why it's difficult not coming from a TMT group at a bank or, at a consulting firm, not just specializing in tech. It's pretty difficult to make that move because those people are at least getting some of the software KPIs in their day-to-day that others aren't necessarily.
So how did you end up actually doing it? How did you end up getting an offer? I mean, it sounds like it's almost impossible.
Yeah, it is. It's super brutal.
So you were flying West Coast. You were flying West Coast. How many times did you fly out here? Like 3?
Probably like 4 or 5.
That's a lot.
I think I did a lot. I interviewed so many places, and honestly, I spent a lot of time interviewing at places that like I don't think I would have left my job for because they weren't really what I was looking for. And in retrospect, I regret. It was good practice, but in retrospect, it wasn't worth the energy. But yeah, so I ended up getting it. This was literally, I don't know, probably a year and a half into looking. So it really goes to show how important practice is. Ended up getting an interview at this firm. I had applied for a different office like 6 months earlier, didn't even get a first round. They put something on LinkedIn again that they were hiring for one of their other offices, applied again, didn't think I'd get a first round, got a first round. It ended up being that even though this was a generalist role, the main hiring team for this worked in the industry that my banking group was focused in. And so they really liked that I had that exposure and would be able to kind of instantly walk into to memos on their space. And so that was what that first conversation was really centered on. And then my super day, so we did a case study and it was actually about like venture math. And so it would have been really helpful to have a guide for that. It was brutal.
We got the term sheet. We have we deep dive on term sheets, deep dive on venture math and all that good stuff.
That sounds amazing. Would have helped me a lot. I struggled through that, but thankfully there was enough resources. There were enough resources online that there's so many blog posts that you can piece it together. Exactly. So ended up doing that. And then I think the key with the super day was just like being able to speak about multiple things and like take a strong view. Like, I think I'd just been listening to so many podcasts and I had really like formed my own internal thesis on a couple of different spaces and why I thought they made viable investment opportunities versus talking about things I liked.
Any pods you want to give a shout out for VC?
Yeah, there's one I love that I'm spacing on the name. I think it's like the Road Untraveled, something like that.
Road Less Traveled, something like that? I don't know.
Road Less Traveled, yeah. I think anything you can find from just like pure software investors, I think is so helpful because there's just common KPIs and benchmarks that you're really expected to know and be able to speak about. So anything you can find on that, I think is just a huge resource.
Cool. So anything else? It's kind of I think a great success story. I mean, obviously you worked really hard in undergrad to kind of open up some doors, but tell me a little bit, like anything else you want to share, like this, so you're here. Tell me about, I forgot to ask you about pay. Let's talk about pay.
Yeah.
So, because I know pay as an associate at a bulge bracket, it's usually pretty good. Usually what, 125 or 150 base, something like that. And then
it's 150 now.
Yeah,
so that was tough. Yeah.
The 150 base, and then the bonus can be at least that big. So tell me about the big pay cut.
You're gonna make me cry. It was rough. No, I mean, with the first offer I got in BC, actually, I turned it down solely because the pay was like just unfathomably low.
Like
I'm
50?
Talking like it was like 85 or something like that. It was like 100 all in, which is just you can't live in San Francisco on 100K and not be
you can
but not like kind of hate your life after making like 300. That's a pretty brutal move to make. So the pay in VC is definitely lower. I think the closer you get to growth, the further you get to like middle market private equity. So fortunately, I'm more on that side of the spectrum. So I would say we're pretty comparable to middle market private equity, and that's something that it's like I can live with.
It's a slight pay cut on the base, but your bonus can still be pretty good in terms of.
I think max your bonus. I mean, everyone does it differently, but like I think at most firms, if you're like on the growth side, it depends on if you're at like a top tier name, maybe you're making like 250 max. Most people make below that. So it's a pretty big cut. But there's a lot, your upside is much higher in the long run if this is what you want to do. So that's how I thought about it.
Are you able to share anything about like how people should think about carry and fund and like economics coming into a fund? Like when you were looking at these VCs, were you very like diligent about like, I want to make sure they're on their second fund. I don't want to go to a new fund. Or I want to make sure that they have a lot of dry powder left. Like, what were you smart enough about the whole industry to think about that stuff? Probably. I mean, you were recruiting for a year and a half.
I was not.
You were? Come on.
I was not. No, because I think if like VC is just so competitive to get into.
Exactly.
You literally want anything. Yeah. And there's so much capital right now going into new funds that I definitely, in retrospect, absolutely. Like if I made a lateral move, absolutely, I would do a ton of research on that side and diligence just in terms of the people and the partnership and track record, XYZ. But when you're getting your first job, like you really do need to take what you get, unfortunately, because it's very rare to get multiple offers. Like I took a huge risk turning down my first one. And I got really lucky. But I mean, typically at the associate, even senior associate level, it's just not normal to get carry, unfortunately. Above that, it is pretty market standard.
And how long do you have to work through, coming in as an associate up to senior associate? And then what is it, a principal level they call it or something? So how long, and then principal start getting a little carry, but how long is it, like 4 years? Is it a 3-year run? What is it? Or just whenever the next fundraise is, whenever the next fund comes in kind of thing.
I'm not sure on that one because I'm so far from that. But I typically from associate, it'll be anywhere from 3 to 4 years. Most funds don't promote directly, honestly. I think really small firms, so the earlier stage you are, they would promote directly, but most places it's 2 to 3 and out. Like go to an operating role or a portfolio company. Senior associate, similar timeline, probably more like 3 years.
Do you think, is that in the cards for you? Like, I mean, you're going to get some operations experience and then head back.
That was going to be what I was going to talk about if you asked if there was anything else. Like, I think there's so many ways into this industry, and I feel it now just coming from a solely financial background. Like, I think you really lack a lot of the rich context that makes you a great senior investor when you don't have operating experience. And I think founders don't necessarily feel like you've been in their shoes and can relate to them. So it's absolutely something I see not as like, oh, I have to leave. I want to go get that experience, because I think in this industry, like it's different from the buy side. Like it's not about your resume in terms of bullet points. It's about like what is your experience and how are you going to use that to contribute to making great decisions? And what are you bringing over someone else? And it's hard to compete without that, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Have you thought about specifically like the type of portfolio company you'd go work for, or startup or tech or software company? Is it something where, like, what role would you play as a former banker? I assume like M&A, like you'd have to be at a later stage company, right?
Yeah. So that's a little bit challenging, right?
Or like, are you going to go to the under the CFO and like help him like rebuild all his like operating models?
Like that
what
sounds
do you do?
awful, and that's
like,
not really a useful experience, right? Because then you're building on the same financial side that you've kind of already been working on, and I don't think that's necessarily what entrepreneurs need later on. So I think from a financial background or a non-technical background, you kind of go more on the business side. So like business operations, sales operations. So understanding the go-to-market, how the sales team is built, like how quotas are set, how you actually get people to deliver on quotas, things that are really about like that go-to-market motion and how do you scale a good idea into a great company. That's often what differentiates. So many of these companies are in the same space and it's all about execution. So it's more roles that kind of give you that sense versus something more
operations and sales. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you feel
exactly. I wouldn't say finance.
Knowing that that's kind of where you're headed, do you feel like the banking background is the best place for you to be to become a VC and an operator? Or do you feel like you would have been better off going to like management consulting?
I think for what I'm in, like later stage VC growth investing, definitely banking. Like it's really difficult to do that without the banking and the modeling experience.
Yeah.
I think if you want more doors open for you on the operating side, definitely consulting. Like there are so many roles I could apply for, but they all want like
McKinsey,
multiple
BCG.
years of, they do. But that's the problem, right? Like they kind of only want McKinsey, BCG, Bain, which in banking, you don't have that. If you were at like a big, there's like 15 great big names that you can go to that people see as the same. And in consulting, they really want those three. So I don't know. I have zero regrets, but I think you can't go wrong with either one of them. But if you want to do later stage, I think banking is always the better choice.
Later stage meaning more like growth equity, LBO side or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, in VC, there's a spectrum. So even not on the LBO side.
Series C, D type.
Yes. They really want people that can model. And I've seen firsthand people that come from the consulting background. Like it's tough. Yeah. They can get there, but it's just.
It's like you with the ref errors.
At that point.
You with the ref errors, the first year analyst, they're like,
exactly.
The headlights,
they can't get data tables to work. And like, that's totally fair, but you don't want to be doing that when you're 27, you know?
Yeah, fair. Cool. Well, thank you for taking all the time and sharing all your wisdom and your story. Any kind of other words of advice for the younger listeners in terms of as they're kind of coming out of undergrad? Maybe there's some bankers listening right now. Any thoughts in terms of, or final advice in terms of the transition to VC, anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I would just say like, don't give up. It's not the same process as private equity. It is on a much different timeline. So I was seeing almost everyone around me get their offers 18 months in advance, right? And I was sitting there as a third year associate and thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to get a job. I'm going to be here forever. That's just not how VC works. Like they don't want you until you've had a few years of experience, and just be patient, like really spend a ton of time reading and like becoming a voice on the industry and what you want to focus on. And it'll work out eventually, whether it's a more linear or circular path, you'll get there.
Did you become a voice? Sorry, just real quick. Did you start writing to try and put yourself out there in terms of?
No, I didn't. You'll hear that a lot. Yeah, you'll hear that a lot. I honestly think like the harsh truth is like people just don't care what, like if you're not in that, like it's really hard to have novel insights. And it's like, I do think you'll see the earlier stage you go, they care about that stuff. So sure, like make a Medium thing or a Substack, like try to get it out there. But I think you're better off just spending your time reading and not worrying about your external kind of presence. I think just get up to speed with what you know.
And talk to people. Yeah,
exactly. Cool. Exactly.
Awesome. Sarah, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.